I was holding a glass of sparkling water when it happened. 1 second, I was smiling politely at a vendor's joke during our spa's holiday party, and the next, I saw my husband's hand resting on the lower back of our 20-year-old intern. His name was Eric. Her name was Kelsey, and his hand was definitely not where it should have been. I stood frozen near the bar, surrounded by colleagues and clients, all dressed in cocktail attire and twinkling holiday lights. No one said a word. Maybe they thought I already knew. Maybe they thought it was harmless. But I saw the way he leaned in. I saw her giggle. And then I saw him kiss her. Not on the cheek. Not a friendly peck. A full, slow kiss. Right there in the middle of the room. Like I didn't exist. I didn't grab my coat. I didn't say goodbye. I just turned, heels clicking across the marble floor of the Nicolette Hotel, and walked straight out into the Minnesota snow. My arms wrapped around myself as the cold hit me like a slap. The air stung, but I needed it. I needed to feel something other than the scream building inside me. That's when I saw him. A man, probably in his 30s, slumped near the side entrance of the hotel. His coat was half off, his lip was bleeding, and he was clearly drunk. 2 hotel security guards stood nearby, arguing about what to do with him. ID says his name's Daniel Kim, one said. He's breathing, let him sleep it off, the other shrugged. But something about the scene. I don't know. Maybe it was the blood on his lip. Or maybe it was the fact that he looked just as shattered as I felt. I know him, I heard myself say. My voice surprised even me. He's a friend. I'll get him home. The guards looked skeptical, but stepped back. I bent down, and for a moment his eyes flickered open. They were dark and clear, despite everything. Thank you, he murmured. Don't talk, I whispered. Just come with me. We took a cab. He gave an address near Nicolette Island, a quiet street lined with old brick buildings and dim streetlights. He didn't speak again, just leaned against the window, breathing quietly. I sat beside him, arms wrapped tight, wondering what the hell I was doing. His apartment was small but spotless. Bookshelves lined the walls. A stethoscope hung by the door. The kitchen smelled like tea and disinfectant. I helped him inside. He apologized in a low voice and disappeared into the bathroom. I stood alone in the living room, surrounded by someone else's life, and wondered if I'd lost my mind. When he came out, hair damp, skin scrubbed clean, wearing a soft gray t-shirt and sweatpants, I finally saw him. Not the bleeding stranger on the curb, but a man, quiet, tired, beautiful, in the way that grief makes someone honest. I'm Daniel, he said. I don't understand why you helped me. I didn't answer. I stepped toward him, and before I could change my mind, I kissed him. He didn't push me away. He didn't pull me closer, either. He just stood there, letting it happen. We didn't rush. We weren't desperate. It was careful, almost reverent. Like we both knew this wasn't love. It was pain meeting pain in the softest way possible. When I woke up, the apartment smelled like coffee. Daniel was in the kitchen, fully dressed, scrolling on his phone. On the counter, 2 mugs waited beside a plate of toast. He didn't look at me when he said, "Good morning. I still don't know your name." Suddenly, shame washed over me like a wave. What had I done? I cheated on my husband with a complete stranger because I caught him kissing someone else? I grabbed my things, heart pounding. "Rachel," I blurted out. "My name is Rachel. I have to go." "Wait," he called, stepping around the counter. "Can you just tell me what happened?" "Nothing happened," I said, pulling on my heels. "It was a mistake." I was out the door before he could say another word. I took the long way home. Snow clung to my hair, my coat, the tips of my lashes. I didn't even notice the cold. My mind kept circling the same thought, over and over. What have I done? I told myself I was no better than Eric, that I had crossed a line. But there was a part of me, small, quiet, buried deep under the noise, that didn't regret it. Not really. When I opened the door to our condo, Eric was sitting at the kitchen counter with a mug of tea like nothing had happened. There she is, he said like I'd just gone out for a walk. You okay? I couldn't find you after the party. He smiled, calm and casual, as if he hadn't kissed someone else just hours earlier. I stood in the doorway, soaked with melted snow, mascara smudged under my eyes, and stared at him. 8 years. That's how long we'd been married. We built the spa together, shared a bed, dreamed of children we hadn't been able to have. I gave everything to this man. You disappeared, he said. I figured you were overwhelmed. I was going to come find you, but, well, you know how it gets. How it gets. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I just walked past him, straight into the bedroom, and shut the door. Over the next few days, I convinced myself that night didn't count. I told myself it had been meaningless, a one-time lapse. I had no intention of seeing Daniel again. I even deleted the rideshare receipt from my email, erased every breadcrumb. Eric acted like nothing had happened. In fact, he seemed better. He bought flowers, made dinner, talked about expanding the spa. Then, one night over takeout, he said, maybe it's time we think seriously about starting a family. I froze mid-bite. Things are stable now. We've both grown. You always wanted kids, right? It was so normal, so tender. I almost believed it. Almost. But when he leaned in to kiss my cheek, I smelled perfume. Sweet. Too floral. Definitely not mine. Where were you last night? I asked. He blinked, unbothered. Out with suppliers. You knew that. He lied easily, smoothly, as if he'd done it 1,000 times. The next few weeks blurred together. We played house. I went to work. I smiled. I laughed. I made love to a man I didn't trust. I tried to forget that night with Daniel. I tried to forget what I had seen at the party. But then the nausea started. At first, I thought it was the flu. Then I counted the days. 10 days late. I took a pregnancy test in the restroom of a pharmacy 20 blocks from home, just to avoid being recognized. 2 pink lines appeared immediately. I stared at them, sitting on a closed toilet seat with my coat still buttoned. My heart thudded in my throat. Pregnant. And the worst part, I didn't know whose it was. Eric and I had been together that week, but so had Daniel. The math didn't lie. It could be either of them. I stuffed the test into my purse and walked home in a daze. Eric was reading on his phone at the kitchen island. How's my sunshine? He asked without looking up. Fine, I said. It was my first lie in this new chapter. A quiet one. The kind that slips past the tongue and settles deep in the bones. For 2 weeks, I carried that truth like a ticking bomb. Every day, I woke up telling myself, today I'll tell him. And every night, I went to bed with the secret still locked in my chest. I tried to convince myself it didn't matter, that the baby was Eric's, that if I just ignored the doubt long enough, it would dissolve. But it didn't. Eric became sneakier. He answered calls in the hallway. He started working late again, turned his phone face down during dinner. And I got sicker. The nausea wasn't just physical. It was emotional, a twisting weight inside me I couldn't shake. On a Wednesday night, while Eric watched basketball with a beer in hand, I pretended to work on spa invoices. In reality, I was reading pregnancy forums, trying to figure out how early a DNA test could be done. His phone buzzed. Again and again. He ignored it, but I didn't. The preview flashed. Kelsey, you promised you'd talk to her. I can't wait anymore. That's when something inside me snapped. I stood up, walked to the bedroom, opened my top drawer, and pulled out a crumpled card. It was the number of a women's health clinic. I had taken it from the wall the day I bought the test, just in case. My hands trembled as I dialed. The woman who answered the phone sounded bored. Routine, like she had scheduled 100 procedures already that morning. I gave her my name and asked for the earliest appointment available. Are you sure this is what you want? She asked, not unkindly. I hesitated. Yes. There's an opening tomorrow at 9 a.m. Dr. Kim is on rotation. He's excellent. I wrote it down on a post-it and stuck it to the inside of my wallet. Then I flushed with nausea again and stumbled to the sink. Eric didn't notice. Or maybe he did and just didn't care. He muttered something about meeting a supplier with our spa director, then disappeared into the bedroom. The next morning, I left before sunrise. I told Eric I was going to help my sister with something. He didn't ask questions. The clinic sat tucked between a laundromat and a dental office on a quiet block near the university. It smelled like bleach and silence. The waiting room was filled with other women, some alone, some with partners. No one looked up. Everyone stared at their phones or their shoes. When they called my name, Rachel Myers, I stood on unsteady legs and followed a nurse down a long hallway lined with closed doors. She opened one. "Go ahead and step inside. Dr. Kim will be with you shortly." I walked in and stopped. Daniel. He sat at a desk in a white coat, flipping through a patient chart. His hair was neater than I remembered, his face calmer, but it was him. His eyes lifted. For a second, he didn't move. Then he blinked and said quietly, "Rachel." I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. Out of every clinic in the city, every rotation, every possibility, it had to be him. "Have a seat," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. I sat down, clenching my hands in my lap to stop them from shaking. He closed the file slowly, eyes never leaving mine. "Are you sure about this?" "Yes," I said, though my voice cracked on the word. He didn't argue. He didn't flinch. He just nodded and said, "May I tell you something first?" I swallowed hard. "Okay." He leaned back slightly in his chair, as if bracing himself against something heavy. "That night," he said, "the night we met, I had just buried my father. Cancer. It was fast and brutal. I hadn't slept in days. After the funeral, I went to that hotel because my father used to dance there with my mom. It was his favorite place. I just wanted to feel close to him again." I blinked. His voice was so calm, but there was something raw just beneath it. I got into an argument with someone at the bar. I don't even remember what it was about. I got punched, ended up outside, bleeding and drunk and thinking, maybe I'd just lie there until I disappeared. Then he looked at me, directly, and then you showed up. My breath caught. You saved me that night, not just physically, emotionally. I didn't know what to say. I stared at my shoes. Daniel exhaled. "And now you're here, asking me to do something I never imagined." The silence between us thickened. "I can't talk about this," I whispered. I can't." He stood. "I'm not trying to convince you of anything, but I do want you to be honest with yourself. Are you here because you don't want the child, or because you're afraid?" Tears welled up, hot and sudden. "I'm afraid," I admitted. "I don't know who the father is. My husband cheated. He's planning to leave. I'm 33 and barely hanging on. I don't even know what I'm doing." Daniel nodded, slowly. "You don't have to decide right now. You have until tomorrow to confirm. But if you do go through with it, I'll make sure it's done safely and respectfully." I stood up, ready to flee. "Rachel," he said as I reached the door. I paused. "No matter what you choose, you're not alone." I didn't look back, but his words followed me all the way out. The air outside felt different after I left the clinic. Not warmer, not in January in Minnesota, but quieter, somehow. Still, as if the city was waiting for me to make up my mind. I didn't go home right away. I wandered. Past coffee shops where people laughed into foam cups. Past parents dragging sleds behind their kids. Past windows filled with light, and the kind of life I used to pretend I had. At some point, I ended up outside my building. Eric wasn't home. His car wasn't in the lot. Inside, the condo was dark and cold. I dropped my bag by the door and collapsed onto the couch, completely drained. That's when I remembered the ultrasound referral. I had left it on Daniel's desk. I should have just called the clinic and asked for a new copy, but something made me go back that evening. Not to see Daniel, just to pick up the damn paper. I didn't make it inside, because there, crumpled in the trash can beside our building, was the referral. My name still on it, the faint outline of something bean-sized in a smudge of gray ink. I pulled it out slowly, unfolded it, and stared. I'd never seen anything like it. It wasn't just a shape. It was a suggestion of life, possibility, a flicker of what could be. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake in the dark, listening to the soft snore of the man I once trusted with everything, and pressed my hand against my lower belly. It was still flat, still silent, but somehow I felt something. Not movement, not yet, just presence. In the morning, Eric kissed my forehead like he always did, murmuring about supplier meetings and inventory delays. I waited until the door clicked shut. Then I got up, packed a suitcase, and called a cab. I didn't leave a note. I didn't know one. I stopped at the spa on the way out. Misha, our operations director, looked stunned to see me walk in with luggage. "Everything okay?" he asked. "No," I said, "but it will be." I handed him an envelope. Inside were documents, my share transfer, resignation, passwords, everything. "Misha, I'm out. My part of the business is Eric's now. Handle it however's clean." His jaw dropped. "Rachel, is this because of Eric and—" I didn't let him finish. "You knew." He looked away. That was answer enough. "You could have said something." "It wasn't my place." "You're right," I said. "It was mine, and I'm taking it back." I walked out without waiting for another word. I found a one-bedroom apartment near Lake of the Isles. High ceilings, old wood floors, a kitchen that smelled like pine cleaner. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The first few days, I kept waiting for Eric to come storming in. But all I got was a text a week later. "Let's talk. You're tired. This is crazy. Just come home." I didn't respond. The following week, he showed up at my door. He had a bouquet of grocery store roses and the face of a man playing a role. Contrition. Performance. "Can I come in?" he asked. "No, Rachel, come on. You're being dramatic." "No, I'm being done." His voice turned sharp. "Is this about that intern?" "Fine. It was nothing. You're blowing it out of proportion." "Kelsey," I said. "You called her Kelsey in your sleep 2 nights ago." He flinched, and then I said it. "I'm pregnant." Everything stopped. He stared at me, as if his ears couldn't believe what they'd just heard. "How far along?" 8 weeks. He did the math. I could see it in his eyes. The party, the timing, the night I left. "Is it mine?" he asked. I paused, not to be cruel, but because I owed the truth more than I owed his comfort. "I don't know." His face changed, hardened. "You don't know? Who the hell were you with?" "You. And someone I met after I caught you with someone else." His jaw clenched. "So this is revenge?" "No," I said. "This is consequence." He dropped the roses. The cellophane cracked like glass. "You're going to raise some stranger's kid and expect me to be okay with that?" "I'm going to raise this child with someone who actually wants to be here, whether he's the father or not." He didn't say another word, just turned and left, slamming the stairwell door so hard it echoed. I slid down the back of my door and cried for a long, long time. Not from heartbreak, not from shame, but from the strange, foreign relief of finally saying everything out loud. Finally choosing myself. Daniel showed up 3 weeks later. No warning, no message. Just a knock on my apartment door one Saturday evening as I was curled up on the couch with a bowl of reheated soup and a pregnancy book I hadn't touched in days. I opened the door halfway and blinked at him, surprised. He was holding a brown paper bag and a thermos. "Hey," he said. "I brought lentil soup, the kind that doesn't taste like regret." I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I stepped aside and let him in. "I got your address through the clinic," he added gently. "I know that's probably not ethical, but I worried." I shook my head. "It's okay. He set the food down, took off his coat, and moved around my kitchen like he belonged there. He didn't ask questions, didn't offer advice, just heated up the soup, filled 2 bowls, and washed the dishes when we were done. We didn't talk much that night, but he stayed a while, long enough to sit across from me on the worn rug, his back against the couch, his fingers resting lightly on the spine of the pregnancy book I'd tossed aside earlier. "Rachel," he said after a while, his voice soft, "what if the baby's not mine?" I looked down. "Then it's not." "And if she is?" I hesitated. "Then everything's more complicated." He nodded, "but not impossible." And somehow that was enough. After that night, he started showing up more often. Not every day, not in a way that overwhelmed, but consistently. He'd drop off groceries, take out my trash, walk with me around the frozen lake, and bring me ginger tea when the nausea returned. He didn't try to take over. He didn't try to claim space. He simply showed up. Eric stayed away. I heard from his lawyer once. An aggressive email about future paternity testing and financial responsibility, but I forwarded it to mine and didn't reply. I started building a new life. Quietly, Daniel rented an apartment a few blocks away. Nothing fancy, just a space to call his own. But most evenings he was at mine. We never labeled anything. Never tried to pretend we were a couple in the traditional sense. But there was comfort in the way he made tea without asking or folded my laundry while I napped. One afternoon we were walking back from the co-op, my belly just beginning to show, when he said, "Have you thought of any names?" I laughed. "Hundreds. None of them feel right." He smiled. "How about something simple?" "Like what?" "I don't know. Sophie." I stopped walking. Let the name hang in the air. Sophie. It felt soft. Whole. Like someone I hadn't met yet, but already loved. "Yes," I whispered. "Sophie." That night I wrote it down in a notebook. Sophie, chosen on a cold evening between groceries and ginger tea. Months passed. My belly grew. So did my fear and my hope, and this strange sense of stability I hadn't expected. Daniel never brought up the baby's paternity again. Neither did I. We both knew there was a chance he wasn't the biological father, but we also knew it didn't matter, not in the ways that counted. We were raising her together, even before she was born. Sophie was due in early May, right as the snow gave up and the city began to thaw. I'd never made it that far in a pregnancy before, never decorated in nursery, never felt the weight and wonder of tiny kicks beneath my ribs. But Daniel had. Not as a father, but as a doctor, and he treated every milestone with a kind of reverence I wasn't used to. He read the baby books I couldn't finish. He learned how to fold newborn swaddles tighter than I ever could. He bought a rocking chair that squeaked a little but felt like home. Then, just as we were entering the final stretch, Eric returned. He didn't text this time, didn't send flowers or empty apologies. He showed up in person, and he didn't come alone. When I opened the door, he was standing there with a lawyer and a folder. His face was tight, angry, controlled. "We want a DNA test," the lawyer said, "and full clarity on any claims to shared financial responsibility or custody." Eric said nothing at first, just stared at my stomach. Then finally, his voice low and cold. "You don't get to raise my child without me knowing if she's mine." I stepped into the doorway, blocking their view. My hand instinctively covered my belly. "Your child," I said quietly. "You mean the one you didn't want when I was still in your house? The one you thought was a weapon instead of a life?" He flinched. "I'm not asking you for a dime, Eric. I'm not asking for your name on a certificate or your face in her memories. I just want to know the truth," he said. "And then what?" I asked. "You swoop in and fix everything with your lawyer? Rewrite the last 6 months? Buy your way back into this picture you chose to walk out of?" The lawyer cleared his throat. "Ms. Myers, if you refuse a paternity test—" "I'm not refusing," I said. "But I'm not doing this now." Not when I'm 35 weeks pregnant and trying to sleep through hip pain and Braxton Hicks contractions. Eric's jaw clenched. You're ruining everything. I took a deep breath. No, I'm rebuilding what you destroyed. Then I closed the door, slowly, deliberately. Daniel was already on the stairwell when I turned around. He'd heard everything, long enough to step in if needed. I asked. He nodded. But you didn't need me. We stood there for a moment in silence, the kind that's heavier than any words. Then he pulled me into his arms, gently like I might break. I didn't. I just rested there for a while, letting myself believe it was okay to lean on someone. Sophie arrived 2 weeks early. It was a rainy Tuesday morning, and the contractions started before sunrise. Daniel drove me to the hospital, held my hand through the spinal, stayed beside me during every push, and cut the cord with shaking fingers. When the nurse laid her on my chest, tiny, squalling, red-faced, I cried harder than I ever had in my life. Daniel kissed the top of her head and whispered, "She's perfect." We named her Sophie Grace. Grace, because nothing about the last year made sense, but somehow we made it here anyway. Eric came to the hospital 2 days later. I let him in. He stood at the foot of the bed with a box of baby clothes and that same polished gilt he always wore when trying to be the man he thought I still wanted. He asked to see her. I nodded. He walked over, pulled back the corner of the blanket, and looked at her tiny face. "She looks like no one," he said finally. "She looks like herself." "That's exactly who she is," I replied. He asked if I'd do the test. I said no. "Why not?" "Because I'm not raising Sophie with a man who needs a lab result to decide whether or not he wants to be a father." He didn't argue, just stood there for a while quiet. Then he leaned forward, kissed my forehead like he had 100 times before, and walked out for the very last time. And just like that, the chapter closed. Daniel brought us home from the hospital in his old Toyota, careful and quiet, as if every pothole might shatter the moment. Sophie was swaddled tight in her car seat, a tiny pink hat slipping over one eye, her lips pursed in a sleepy protest. When we got to the apartment, I stepped inside first and stopped. There was a crib set up beside my bed, a changing table in the corner, diapers stacked neatly in woven baskets, wipes, tiny socks, bottles, everything I hadn't dared to prepare for. Because some part of me had never truly believed we'd make it this far was already here. I turned to him. "When did you do all this?" He smiled. "While you were still in the hospital. I figured if I waited for permission, you'd say it wasn't necessary. I didn't give you a key." "No," he said softly, "but you gave me a reason." I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. I just watched him lift Sophie into his arms like he'd been doing it all his life, like she'd always been his to hold. That first month was a blur of diapers and feedings and tears, hers and mine. I was exhausted, sore, terrified half the time, but never alone. Daniel stayed every night, slept on the couch or in the glider, waking before I did to make tea or sterilize bottles. He never asked for anything in return. One night, when Sophie was about 6 weeks old and finally asleep, we sat on the floor together with takeout cartons and matching dark circles under our eyes. I looked at him for a long time before speaking. "Do you ever wonder?" I asked. "If she's yours?" He didn't answer right away, just kept poking at his noodles with a plastic fork. "No," he said eventually. "Not really." "Why not?" "Because she's here. And I'm here, and that feels like enough." I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. "It is." We never did the DNA test, not because we were avoiding the truth, but because the truth no longer mattered in the way it used to. Sophie had Daniel's calm eyes and my uneven smile, but her spirit, her tiny, fierce, opinionated spirit, was all her own. We didn't move in together. We didn't rush into romance. We didn't try to squeeze our broken pieces into some fairy tale shape. We just showed up, every day, for her, for each other, for the quiet, hard, extraordinary work of choosing one another without conditions. By summer, Sophie was rolling over, babbling nonsense and grabbing fistfuls of my hair. Daniel was still living a few blocks away, but at this point, half his stuff had migrated into my apartment anyway. He still worked long hours. He opened a small private clinic on the edge of the neighborhood, modern, minimal, his name printed modestly on the door. Patients loved him. Nurses called him the quiet one. He came home smelling like soap and caffeine and paper charts. I launched an online skincare shop during maternity leave. Nothing fancy, just a few curated products, handmade masks, oils, serums I used to mix back in the spa days. I packed orders while Sophie napped, responded to customer emails during late-night feedings. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. We weren't trying to be perfect. We were trying to be present. One evening, we were sitting on a park bench while Sophie gnawed on a teething ring, the lake shimmering behind us, the air warm with the first real hint of summer. I turned to Daniel. "Isn't it strange?" I said, "We don't even know for sure who she belongs to, and yet we're raising her together." He glanced at Sophie, then back at me. "She belongs to herself. We just get to love her." Then he smiled, the kind that starts slow and ends in your bones. "That's the thing, Rachel. Family's not about blood. It's about showing up. It's about choosing someone. Every single day." And that we did. Sophie turned 1 in May. We held a tiny party in the backyard of Daniel's clinic. Just a handful of friends, some cupcakes, and a balloon that terrified her more than it delighted her. She wore a dress with sunflowers on it and dug both hands into the cake like she was born to defy etiquette. Daniel held her steady on his hip while I took pictures, trying to memorize every inch of the moment. The curve of her cheek, the frosting in her hair, the way she looked at him like he was the center of her world. We never used labels. Not for us. Not for what we had. But one night, while I was rinsing bottles and he was folding laundry on the couch, Sophie crawled over to him, pressed her face against his chest, and said her very first word. "Papa." Daniel froze, looked at me. I smiled. "You better answer her." From that day on, it stuck. She called him Papa before she called me Mama, and the way his face lit up every time she said it. I didn't care who shared her DNA. That man was her father. Sometimes, when she's asleep in her crib and the apartment is finally quiet, I sit beside the window and look out at the streetlights blinking below. And I think about all the ways this story could have ended differently. If I hadn't walked out that night, if I hadn't stopped for a stranger, if I'd listened to the voice in my head telling me I couldn't do this alone. But I wasn't alone. Not really. Love didn't come wrapped in certainty. It didn't show up in vows or contracts or bloodlines. It came in the way Daniel held Sophie during her midnight fevers, in the way he stood behind me without needing credit, in the way he looked at us like we were something worth building a life around. It came in the form of consistency, of quiet, of choice. Eric never reached out again. He signed the paperwork, ceded his share of the business, and moved on with his life. I heard through a mutual friend that he married Kelsey 6 months later. They moved to Arizona. I don't miss him. I don't wish him harm. But I no longer carry the version of me who needed his approval to feel complete. Sophie is one now. She's walking, wobbling like a tiny drunk explorer. She says up and no and oh with equal enthusiasm. She has Daniel's calm gaze and my stubborn chin, and a personality entirely her own, fierce, joyful, wild. The other day, we sat together at the park, the 3 of us on a blanket in the grass. Daniel was reading a medical journal. I was answering customer emails. Sophie was throwing goldfish crackers at a squirrel who was far too bold for his own good. And I thought, this is it. Not the life I imagined, not the one I planned, but the one I chose. And I'd choose it again, every single time.